Welcome back to another episode of Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson, and today we're diving into the world of cybersecurity with Christian Hyatt, co-founder and CEO of Risk 360. Christian's journey is intriguing. He began in public accounting before transitioning into cybersecurity, where he's made significant impacts. In this episode, we explore the evolution of cyber threats and the sophisticated criminal organizations behind them. Christian shares the challenges of regulation and compliance, the macroeconomic forces driving cybercrime, and the importance of building a strong internal cybersecurity culture. Whether you're part of a large corporation or small business, Christian offers practical advice on boosting your cybersecurity measures. So get ready for an enlightening conversation that you won't want to miss. Let's dive in. Well, Christian, I'm really excited to have you on the Count Me In podcast. And you are an expert in cybersecurity, running your own firm, but you didn't start in cybersecurity. And maybe we can talk a little bit about your background as we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So, probably like so many people in the audience, I started my career in public accounting. I graduated college from the University of Georgia, and I wanted to get into consulting. And like so many of us at 22, what is consulting? Who knows what consulting is? So, I was recruited heavily out of the Big Four. I ended up going to Grant Thornton, which was the fifth biggest accounting firm. I think they've dropped a couple of spots. I think they're like the sixth now, but the reason I went over there is because they had a cybersecurity advisory arm, and kind of the way I was thinking about it was almost a startup inside of this 50,000 person firm. So I was like, cool, well, I'll do that, and then it ended up being awesome. I was able to help out on all sorts of engagements. I got the opportunity to sell to customers very early on because this was kind of a new practice. So I was a 22-year-old helping put together proposals and sitting on sales calls. I was helping figure out what report deliverables should look like, which was really exciting, figuring out delivery methodologies. And over time, I realized just how big of a problem cybersecurity was and how much it was impacting society and us individually, as well as of course, businesses, and how big of a business problem it was, and just went on from there. I always had an entrepreneurial bug, though, always. So I wanted to do that. And I get my mentor talked me into getting my MBA. So I went to Georgia Tech, got my MBA, met my business partner. I got a partnership opportunity in an accounting firm. So I was kind of on the fence: do I go the partner route or do I take the entrepreneurial leap? And so I decided to make the leap. And I knew my backup plan was I was pretty employable, could probably go get another job. And my very first client was a $30,000 client. I knew that was enough to pay the bills for a while, and I was hopeful that I would be able to figure out the rest. And sure enough, almost 10 years later, we've built a pretty solid company about something we're passionate about.
That's awesome. And so what is Risk 360 doing? What problem are you guys solving?
Sure. So, one of the biggest problems in cybersecurity for organizations is regulation and compliance. So there's all these acronyms: SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI DSS. The whole alphabet soup of different requirements that organizations often have to do, and most organizations are spending an incredible amount of time and effort getting those certifications and maintaining those programs. And what Risk 360 does is sometimes we're the auditor, so we can issue some of the certifications. More often than not, we're helping an organization implement a program for the first time. So maybe they hear some new acronym like ISO 27001 and they don't know how to get started, so we can help them implement that program. And then often they don't even have the people to do it. So they'll outsource the whole function to us, almost like outsourced accounting, but outsourced compliance as a service. And then we have a platform called Full Circle that helps harmonize all of that. So our bread and butter is if an organization has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 of those different requirements that they have to comply with, is we help them harmonize that, build one streamlined, efficient program to manage all of that, and then give them the consulting resources to help with that as well. So that's who Risk 360 is.
Wow. I mean, you guys are doing some awesome things, because when it comes to cybersecurity, it's kind of like this mythical world. You always think of like the anonymous things with the face mask and the weird thing with the matrix code running down the screen. But maybe you could kind of help us help the audience understand, like, who are the bad guys really out there when it comes to who are we protecting ourselves from?
Yeah. So something pretty interesting happened over the last couple of years, in that there's a ransomware crew, one of the biggest organizations, criminal organizations that we know about, named Conti, had some internal turmoil and ultimately dismantled. But upon their demise, one of their members leaked a lot of internal documents on Twitter.
Mm,
So for the first time, research organizations like NSA and the UK intelligence services were able to comb through those documents and see who are the bad guys, like what are they all about. And
mm,
what we found was that they are very much not unorganized hackers in hoodies that we would like to believe them. These are sophisticated, well organized organizations, to the point that they have defined and documented organizational structures. They have different departments. So, for example, Conti had an R&D group, they had an operations group, they had negotiators for the scheme that they were running. They also had an accounting and finance department. They had human resources. They ran payroll biweekly, just like any normal company. They did performance reviews. They had SLAs for help desk. They It was just a real organization with policies and procedures and everything that you would believe it to be. And that is to the extent of the criminal organizations that we're up against, are these highly organized, efficient machines. And then what surprised me most as an entrepreneur is the revenue and the margins these companies operate at. So Conti, they were doing about $200 million in revenue per year. And that's not the incredible part. What the incredible part is they had about 80% margins. So you can just imagine, if you're
wow.
thinking about why is this happening? What are the incentives that get these criminal organizations to keep doing this? And you're talking about organizations that largely operate in the second and third world,
Mm.
making $200 million in revenue with 80% margins. So there's just an incredible amount of incentive for organized crime to continue to do this. And it's not the hackers in the hoodie, it's very organized, sophisticated organizations that we're up against.
You mean they're not dark rooms with loud techno music playing all the time?
I didn't say that. They might be in dark rooms with techno music, but
Okay, okay. So, these organizations aren't paying taxes, but are governments finding them out, and are they helping the GDP so much that they don't want to dismantle them? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, so a lot of times people ask, it's like, why doesn't the U.S. government do something about this? Why don't we go over there, stop the bad guys, put them in jail because they're causing so much havoc on the economy? And the reason that the governments largely permit this to operate is because we're riding this really fine line between a hot war and keep it quiet, low simmer economic war. So
Mm,
cybersecurity warfare is very real. But if we were to go to Russia or China and extradite some guys, like grab them and take them back to the United States, that could start a very real hot war. So the United States and Russia and China and others, all the players in this game, are highly incentivized to keep this at what I call just a low simmer.
mm,
So the way that functionally operates is the bad guys, they're pretty much free to operate. I'll use free in quotes, free to operate if they don't do too much damage. They
mm,
can attack financial organizations, they can attack corporate organizations. What they can't do, as a rule, is attack critical infrastructure or attack hospitals where human life would be at risk, or attack military units or anything like that. That would trigger a possible hot war. So you'll even see in like the hacker forums where they're releasing these tools, sometimes they'll even put up disclaimers and appropriate use of using the tool. So maybe they release a ransomware tool and it'll explicitly say, don't use this on hospitals or critical infrastructure and so on and so forth, because there's kind of this honor code amongst thieves where they kind of know the scope and boundaries of how they're permitted to operate, as well as geopolitically. China and Russia don't want to do too much to the U.S. The U.S. doesn't want to do too much to China and Russia because they don't want to kick off some bigger thing. So we're in this limbo ground where people are permitted to operate as long as they don't go too far, and it's kind of kept quiet and hush hush and political. And that's my read on why they're still operating and why it's such a big issue still.
wow. I It doesn't surprise me, but it's still surprising that that happens. But it kind of goes like, the cops don't always arrest the person peddling drugs in the corner because they want to get the person who gave him the drugs or who sold them the drugs. It seems kind of like that, where they don't want to go for the small fries, and as long as they're not doing anything too crazy, they'll leave them be.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit like that, and I think about like, why is all this happening? Why is this so popular?
Mm.
And ahead of the show, I was thinking about some of the macroeconomic forces at play that are leading us here. So, for example, one trend is if you look at cybercrimes predicted to be about a $10 trillion criminal enterprise.
Hmm.
And just for context, it's about the third largest economy after the US and China. So, just an incredible scope. It's also larger and outpacing the criminal drug trafficking. So, as far as criminal organizations goes, it's very, very lucrative, up there with the top. So that's kind of one factor. Then you have the second factor where we're creating more data than we've ever created before, like just mass digitization. You can think of Internet of Thing devices, your cell phone, your smartwatch, so on and so forth. And we create more data. We've created more data in the last year or two than we've created in all of human history. It's in the zettabytes. And just for a little bit of context, if you were to write on a piece of paper, a typical piece of paper in 12-point font, front and back, and you just started stacking that stack of paper would reach to the next galaxy. There aren't enough trees in the world to print that much data, and it's growing that much it's growing more and more every year. So it pays to steal. Cybercrime's huge. There's more data created than ever before, meaning there's more stuff to steal. And then you have this environment where organizations are more and more relying on third parties to do business. So, if you're an accounting department out there, you might be outsourcing payroll, or you're probably using SAP or Oracle, or maybe even QuickBooks in the cloud. Everything you're not vertically integrated anymore. Your critical data doesn't just live with you; it lives with your third parties. So it's not just you have to be concerned about their cybersecurity; it's your third parties. 2/3 of all cybersecurity breaches in some years originated from third parties. That's how big of a deal it is. So, from a macro trends perspective, you have cybercrime pays. You have more digitization than ever, all of this data to steal, plus this reliance on third parties and this whole ecosystem. And it just makes it ripe for cybersecurity to be a big problem and a growing problem.
Which is all the more reason to make sure that cybersecurity is kind of up to snuff within your organization. So if somebody's trying to say, hey, you know what, I want to like ramp up things up, but I don't know where to start, what would be the first steps that they should do?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your size of business. Most businesses that, like the folks listen to this podcast, they're in an accounting department, so presumably their business has some scale. So if I'm thinking about a business like that, it's like there's always this delicate dance that businesses have to play, because they're trying to be profitable, they're trying to run efficiently, yet they have to build enterprise value, and they have to future proof their business by investing in critical infrastructure, IT, and cybersecurity, which is often a cost center. So what is the right balance between investing in the future of your company and the risk management of your company, but also being very diligent with profits and your budgets, especially in today's economic environment where we're all trying to be lean and trying to do as much as we can to help our company's profitability? And I think that's where like accountants can help think through that problem. Like, what are the ratios that make sense for investment? Because that's where CISOs need help. So CISO is Chief Information Security Officer. So that's the problem that we have as security professionals often is, given infinite budget, we would do infinite things to protect the business. So we have to strike that delicate balance of budget versus risk management. And I think there's an important partnership between CFOs and accounting and the security department to understand what the business needs out of cybersecurity. So if you go back a few years ago, it was a time of rapid investment. The economy was booming. There was a lot of private equity money out there. Venture capital was giving money out, so you could proactively invest in cybersecurity. In today's environment, organizations are largely trying to get lean. They're trying to get efficient. Cybersecurity is often seen as a cost center. So CISOs are kind of left scratching their head. What does the business need out of me? What's that balance between risk management and spending on the budget? And I think that's a really good conversation with CFOs or accounting professionals, because CFOs and accounting professionals are also at the intersection of risk management and budgets and finances and profitability. And I think I say all that to say I think there needs to be a conversation amongst executives about how to invest and get the
Mm.
most out of your money, more so than the what you should do, because there's almost an infinite number of things that you could do if you're trying to get one off the ground. Does that make sense?
It does. It really does. Because, you have obviously the finance and accounting team has to be a part of the conversation,
Yep.
because you got to know how much you can spend and what's best for the organization. So bringing them into that strategic conversation. But I think more importantly is you have to recognize that this is a key element that needs to be paid for, or else you could lose a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the challenges we have is in the security community is, the organization is governed either by board of directors or executive leadership team, and often there's an audit committee, there's risk committees, and trying to decipher what the organization wants is very difficult, and what the organization needs. And security professionals, what we do is we'll often get in our foxhole. We're very plugged into the risk and into the headlines and to all the possibilities that could happen. We're often less plugged into the business objectives and the budgets and the things the board wants and what's happening at the audit committee and all those kind of obligations. Whereas accounting professionals are just so plugged into that. And I don't think they talk enough. I really don't. I don't think cybersecurity and finance and accounting leadership are at the same table often enough. And I think there's a huge opportunity to get at that table, talk about what the businesses need, and strike that balance between risk management and cybersecurity.
What does that conversation look like between the cybersecurity and the CFO? What does that conversation look like?
So one of the things I've found when I'm coaching organizations, we'll help them build security programs. And the number one problem that I see is that there isn't a forum for them to talk.
Mm.
Like there really isn't a space dedicated for the CFO or similar to talk to the security team. So the worst case scenario is that the conversation goes undone. There just is no conversation. So one of the first things that we recommend when we walk in organizations is like, you got to figure out your governance strategy. So the word we call it is we'll call it the Information Risk Council. And what that does is that gets security leadership, technology leadership, and often the CFO, maybe even legal at the same table to talk about organizational risk. And it starts with education. So often a CISO will do a maturity assessment and say, hey, look, this is the current maturity of the organization. Here's our biggest gaps. Here's some opportunities for improvement. But the thing is, the CISO can't just go start maturing the organization because it might be out of alignment with the key business objectives of that organization. So an easy example might be, hey, my business is really focused on growth in the healthcare sector. Well, that's good to know because the CISO needs to be thinking about HIPAA and protecting healthcare data and so on and so forth, and they would invest in that. Alternatively, they might find out, hey, our organization is cutting cost right now. We have to get to profitability. We have to be extremely lean. So we need to be outsourcing key functions. We need to consolidate tools. Well, that's a very different conversation. And if the CISO and the CFO and the leadership team aren't having that conversation, there's a huge opportunity for the CISO just to go off in the right direction, thinking they're doing the right thing, but not doing the right thing. So my biggest piece of advice is to get everybody at the same table and be crystal clear about what those business objectives are. Allow the security team to align their activities to those business objectives. And then the CFO and the accounting professionals have such good business acumen. They can ask hard questions to ensure alignment. So for me, that conversation looks like alignment. It's about clarity of business objectives and then ensuring alignment, and then being a partner with the security team to help make sure they're in alignment with the business objectives.
Can we talk a little bit about you said that a lot more organizations are, kind of outsourcing more of the things like HR is over here and this service is over here. How do you have a comprehensive security plan when you're using so many other vendors? How can you align all that together?
Yeah, there's this whole ecosystem of third-party risk management and
Hmm.
certifications. That's a big piece of what Risk 360 does. So what typically happens in organizations is you kind of hopefully have an inventory of your key vendors that have key data.
Hmm.
I'm going to use a payroll provider in this example. Well, first of all, you need to vet that vendor. What does their security program look like? That's typically done in the form of questionnaires, and more often than not, contractually, there's some commitments. And you're also expecting that vendor to get some kind of third-party attestation. So that could be a SOC 2 report, an ISO certification, something like that. And then you're going to rely on that third party. This is where a lot of accounting firms do. They're doing their attestation reports. and vetting that vendor. So that's kind of that's step one, is just really thorough and meaningful third party risk management. And then the second thing that I think happens is just having a really deep relationship with your vendor. Like I know for some of our biggest clients, we try to get away from being transactional, and we really try to plug in to what they're trying to accomplish as a business and how we can support them do that. And we actually coach our clients through how to manage us. Like, how do you have a meaningful conversation with your vendor that's in alignment with your business objectives? And you probably only want to do that with your biggest key vendors, but it needs to happen. So you probably assign a relationship owner. So the long story short is it's complicated, and there needs to be a program around how you manage third-party risk. And that often is, again, at the intersection of the CISO, who's managing third-party risk, and the CFO, who's probably involved in procurement and paying those vendors. So it's another topic where there's got to be a huge amount of collaboration between those two to manage the risk.
Yeah, there really does. There has to be a lot of collaboration, and you have to be really organized internally in order and have a lot of communication between because your CFO has to talk to your IT, has to talk to the CISA, right? The chief I don't even know what that means.
Chief Information Security Officer. Yep.
There we go. I know you said it earlier, and I was like, I lost it. But if you have a big enough organization, there has to be great communication for all those things to be in alignment in order to better help the organization.
Absolutely. I mean, our tendency is to kind of operate in our silos, develop centers of excellence. And it's so easy to say, if you're a security professional, why does accounting or finance care about what I'm doing? And conversely, it's so easy if you're in accounting and finance to say, those are IT guys, they're the cybersecurity team. But when you really think about objective alignment, budgets, risk management of the organization, there's so much in common, and it requires that amount of collaboration.
So are there key metrics? I mean, obviously every organization is different, but are there certain key metrics? Do you got to put like a sticker on the wall that says days without a hack 0 or 5 or whatever? Is that your key metric, or are there other key metrics you should be looking at as an organization?
Yeah, I mean, there are many. If I was an executive, some of the ones I would be looking at, and I harp on this all the time, is business objective alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that's not a KPI. You can't really put a number on that, but you can examine a plan, and it's how aligned is the security organization to those business objectives, and a lot of challenging of that. Like, is what you're really doing really helping the business? Is that in alignment with what we're trying to do? Like, that in of itself is like a KPI milestone, something that needs to be challenged over and over again as the organization changes. That is a key one. I think measuring security efficiency is important. Ways to do that is to think about how are you spending your money in terms of tools. You have too many tools versus not enough tools. Are you hitting your budgets or exceeding your budgets? Those are important. Vulnerability scans is an easy one. So what most security organizations do is they're continuously scanning and evaluating their organization. They'll find a vulnerability, and then they'll do their best to close that vulnerability on a timely basis. So how fast can they do that? I would also look at cultural things like employee retention, because if you have a really healthy culture and you're retaining top talent, things kind of take care of themselves. And I rarely see that as a KPI in a security team, although security tends to be very high turnover. So those are a few that maybe people could look at.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Speaking of culture, is there like an internal education that needs to happen with an organization, especially if, let's say an organization comes to Risk 360 and said, hey, we're doing all these things together. Now, when they're implementing that, what does that look like inside of an internal culture as you're changing the organization?
Yeah. So a piece of context is that if you look at like most of the cybersecurity attacks are from an employee clicking a link, having a laptop stolen, getting scammed, something relatively simple, just someone getting scammed. And the most effective way to prevent that, absent technology, there's some tools that can help, is employee vigilance. You see the email come through and you recognize that as a possible scam. Someone calls you and asks you for a bank account number, and you question them, and you're vigilant, and you hang up and you call back and verify that it's legitimate. So those tiny behaviors throughout the organization are a really powerful way to protect the organization. So security teams go to great lengths to try to build security culture within an organization. The problem is you'll see things like phishing training, or the security team will say, hey, sign this policy, this annual policy awareness, or take this security training that you have to do. And what do people do? They watch the training, click as fast as they can to get through it. Probably don't watch it deeply. It also feels annoying. You're like, it's just another admin task and I'm already so boring. And I think the reason employees tend to feel that way is because they don't have the context as to why this is so important. So one of the things that I think organizations do really well, and I actually spoke at one of our clients today. They had an all hands meeting and they invited me to come speak and talk about cybersecurity for an hour and do Q&A. And I've done that kind of thing before. But what that did is it engaged the workforce. I was able to give them a little bit of context and make it very personal to them. Like, this is how it impacts you and your family. This is how it impacts your business and why it's important. And then all of a sudden light bulbs went off from people and like, oh man, this is critical for our business to succeed. This matters to me in a very real way. Oh, and this is why our cybersecurity team is asking us all these questions and sending us training all the time. And I think that little bit of just relationship building, whether it comes from a third party like I just did, or if it's just your security team doing the rounds and giving people context into why it matters, I think just goes so far inside of an organization. Because when people have the context, they tend to take things a lot more seriously. So culture matters. And the way to get culture, I think, is through really strong relationships and giving people context.
I think that's some amazing advice, even outside the cybersecurity conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having a good culture within your organization is extremely important.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. What about smaller organizations? Because, not every organization is going to have a CISA, as you've been mentioning that title. Not every organization is going to have that. And sometimes, the information technology comes underneath the CFO suite, and suddenly they're managing the CFO, the accounting teams and the IT teams. Yep. What advice would you give to somebody who's like, I need to get into this, but I'm not a CISA necessarily?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is most organizations don't have any security people. They have maybe IT, and that might even be outsourced. So security by default becomes an IT responsibility. And that's just the reality of things, and that's okay. Yeah. So the question is, if you're in that situation, what do you do? So my advice, if I was going to assess IT for effectiveness in security, I would advise them to leverage the tools that they already have to the fullest extent. A couple examples. So one example is almost every organization is either using Microsoft 365 or Google Suite, right? Those tools come with an abundance of security features. Examples would include multi-factor authentication, single sign-on. They can do logging and monitoring. And often those are just features that no one's using. They haven't turned them on and they're not using them. So maybe if you're a CFO, you ask the question, hey, will you go over all the security features that we're currently paying for and tell me whether they're enabled or not, and explain to me what they are, and use that as a KPI to drive performance, even if you're managing a third party. And if something's turned off, then you can ask the question, why is this off? And if it's turned on, you can ask the question, well, how are you using this? Can you show me an example of this in action? So that's probably the number one piece of advice. Use your tools that you're already using to their fullest extent, because Microsoft and Google and others are doing us a big favor by building security in fairly natively.
Yeah, that's great. Look at what you already have. I love that, especially for small organizations who might not be able to do, spend the same spend, but you're already spending on another tool. Maybe that tool can help give you what you need to start off at least.
For sure.
Well, Christian, I think this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and just chatting about cybersecurity within organizations with me. And thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely, Adam. Thanks, man.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.